Good evening, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to episode 4 of the Current Case podcast. Just a quick note, Fishwa and I couldn't make today's episode due to some extraneous circumstances. However, we will both be back for next week's season finale. With that out of the way, Jared, let's go ahead and get it rolling.
All right. So first tonight, I want to jump into what's happening in Canada at the moment. So right now, they're in the works of a big gun control legislation. So the Liberal government is passing a bill that will limit hunting rifles. Over 1,500 models and variants are set to be banned. So I figured this is a good topic for tonight, just to talk about gun control in general, since of course it's a hot topic right now in the United States. Every time we have a mass shooting, gun control always gets brought up. And to be fair, we've had tons of mass shootings this year. I think we've had the most in comparison to other years. 2021 was also very high as well. 2020 was low, but mainly because of the lockdowns and everything else. So massive spike in mass shootings. So I figured we should all give our general thoughts on gun control, and then we could circle back to what the Canadians are doing, talk about Trudeau's actions and what we think they should do up there. But first, I will give my thoughts on gun control, and then we can just go around and see what everyone else thinks. But I've always been very split on gun control. I've gone back and forth. I actually remember talking to Matthew back in May, right after the Uvalde school shooting. I mean, I was absolutely disgusted by what happened there. I'm a teacher myself, and especially seeing elementary kids die like that, it's absolutely tragic. So I told him, yeah, exactly. I remember telling you that I don't think civilians should own assault rifles, assault weapons, stuff that would be used in the military. I think civilians should only use pistols or handguns that they should defend themselves with, and then hunting rifles that they could use to get food. Now, my opinion has changed since then. I've kind of come around, reflected on my ideas, and at the time, I think when I was telling Matthew, I was very emotional, I wasn't really thinking straight. I mean, I saw what happened. I was pretty horrified by what I had seen and what I heard about it. And I was like, yeah. So, I mean, I now think that Americans have the right to own whatever they want. I mean, I've been to ranges myself. I went to one with you pretty recently. Fortunately, I couldn't shoot because I wasn't feeling the best. But, I mean, people love to do it just for sport. I mean, it is a lot of fun to actually do it. Of course, 98% of Americans would never think of doing something nefarious with assault rifles, with military-grade equipment. So I've definitely come around with that. I think a lot of the gun control talk, comes from an emotional reaction. The first thing to blame, and I think what's the easiest thing to blame, are the guns when these shootings happen. So people see that, they see the assault rifles, like the AR-15 being used, and they're like, oh, let's just get rid of that. That will solve everything. But the question is, will that actually solve everything? No. So, yeah, my thoughts on gun control have definitely shifted. Originally, like I said, I was very much for banning assault rifles, but now I've kind of come around. But if you guys want to jump in there, share your general thoughts on gun control, can have a debate or discussion here.
All right. So, yeah, obviously it's tragic and regrettable anytime anybody loses their life due to the misuse of these tools. But the simple fact is, the Second Amendment is very clear about what it says. Shall not be infringed. And if you look at the historical context of when it was written and why it was written, it is so that we, the people, are able to fight back against a tyrannical government that may turn against us if the need ever arises. So I would actually argue we should be allowed to own whatever the military can own, because if the government ever decides to turn the military on us, we need to be able to fight back against that.
Interesting point.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, I think it would certainly curb excess military spending. I know a lot of times in government, they'll just spend as much as they can out of their budget to ensure that they get the same amount the next year. But you know, if they need to like artificially use up their budget and buy stuff that they don't need, then maybe their budget shouldn't be as big.
Yeah, I mean, even already, you do have to kind of register for some. Say if you have an antique like bazooka or something that still has to be registered for as a destructive device, even if it is deactivated. But honestly, I don't know exactly what someone would do with like a spare M72 Law or AT4 or whatever launcher type weapon. In many ways, that just is flat out overkill for civilian use.
Ashton, what are your thoughts on gun control? I don't think I've heard your general opinion.
Yeah, I think kind of like yours, Jared, mine has kind of fluxed over time, but as it stands right now, I think my main opinion on gun control is it's, in many ways, trying to tighten gun control over guns is a bit pointless because I think, in many ways, those who still seek to do criminal acts with firearms are still going to procure their weapons, legally or illegally. I mean, you only have to look so far as what happened with the late Shinzo Abe, former Prime Minister of Japan, who was assassinated by someone who basically had an improvised homemade gun. And Japan's gun laws are a lot more strict than that of the US.
Right, right. Japan pretty much has the strictest gun laws of pretty much any nation, and somebody still managed to slap together basically a pipe rifle and assassinate Shinzo Abe, which was really, really unfortunate and regrettable. But that really goes to show that these kind of restrictive laws aren't really helping anyone. They're not solving the problem. And there's also, you got to keep in mind the United States is a huge country with a huge population. It would be effectively impossible to round up all of the registered weapons, let alone all of the unregistered ones. I mean, with a country like the United Kingdom or Australia, I mean, Australia is about the size of the US, but the population is much smaller, really centered around 3 distinct zones. So it's easier to round up all the weapons in those areas. But in a country that's as spread out as this, with population centers all over the country, it just can't feasibly be done. It's frankly a waste of resources, in my opinion.
Yeah, plus there's also, I think what I was going to get at is, if anything, gun control might actually make things a bit worse for when it comes to a self-defense perspective, because if some criminal has managed to cobble together an improvised weaponized firearm, what do you have left to defend yourself with? Go ahead.
Excuse me. Second Amendment cases, I mean, they have been fought in the Supreme Court before. Most of the time, they go for the Second Amendment. In some cases, it is against, usually in the cities. I know Chicago, for example, has one of the strictest gun laws. However, they also have one of the highest gun violence rates in, well, essentially all of America. With the Second Amendment itself, the problem is, like, I would argue it is kind of vague compared to the other amendments, which leaves it somewhat open for interpretation. And I saw something, yeah, and I saw something while I was in college. We were actually looking at different textbooks. And we looked at a Texas textbook compared to a California textbook, a government textbook. So they listed the Second Amendment, and they each had different interpretations of what the Second Amendment meant. Of course, Texas was all for, hey, this is exactly what they meant here. Citizens are allowed to own guns. Case closed. And the California textbook was essentially like, they're allowed to own, but very high restrictions in place. They meant a militia, so an organized, essentially civilian military, and so on. So it's like, with such a vague amendment, there's always going to be different interpretations in place. It's also a reason why we can't really agree on many things when it comes to this amendment.
Yeah, and I think it also kind of ties into one other crucial aspect that I think is often ignored in the major media, but I think the whole thing about firearm ownership and whatnot is that it's not really so much the fault to the weapon, it's how the person uses it and what they intend to use it for. Because I think most of us here have actually been to a range. We've had the chance to use firearms in a safe environment. But I think it's just these small few people who are really kind of giving this whole topic a bad name. I mean, all it takes is one idiot to destroy in minutes or seconds what someone or a group of people have taken years to set up.
And I think this country hasn't really addressed its mental health crisis at all. I think that's something that we really need to hit on. That is something as a country we have to work on. I think there's a lot of just problems in our society in general. We fail to address mental health. We value the grind over personal needs. I mean, a lot of that I think is again, I guess it could probably be a whole other thing, but some problems I have with capitalism in general. So just going back to that, I think as a country we have to address the mental health crisis in order to solve the rising shootings.
Yeah, obviously something has to be done about the mental health crisis in this country, but how exactly do we prevent guns from falling into the hands of mentally ill people who will use the guns to hurt themselves or others? And to that, I don't know the answer. I think we really have to attack the root cause of the issue, because mentally ill people obtaining guns isn't the root cause. That is a symptom of the root cause, which is the mental health crisis itself, right? So when we have things like red flag laws that allow people to just, report you as a potential danger, and then they come take away your guns without any due process, and you only get the opportunity to get them back after they've determined that you're not a threat, that really creates some problems, because people who are, depressed or anxious or what have you will be, I would wager, less likely to go seek help if they know that getting that diagnosis and getting the help they need is going to result in them not being able to legally own firearms, which that is a huge problem, I would say.
Ash, did you have something first?
Yeah. I'm. As far as concealed carry goes, it was really. I think it really comes down to. Are you willing to defend yourself? But, I mean. It's kind of what am I going to say? I mean, concealed carry, it would certainly be nice to have something on hand in case something bad does happen that might put your life at risk and you need to defend yourself. Though, how often does that realistically happen? Sure, I suppose it's better to be prepared and not have to use it than suddenly need to use it and not have it on hand.
Yeah, for sure. But, what I wonder is concealed carry really the best option? I mean, if you open carry, people are going to see that. If you've got a big iron on your hip, people probably aren't going to mess with you, I would assume. I mean, are you going to mess with somebody that has a giant gun on their hip?
And you find the weak points, or find any points you could take advantage of. I mean, I would go for the gun first if I'm,
Yeah, I also kind of feel that openly carrying a firearm might potentially induce some unneeded panic in certain situations, even if your intentions are completely peaceful and for self-defense only.
Yeah, good point there, Ash. I mean, like, I see a guy walking around openly with a gun. I mean, even if his intentions or their intentions are good, it's like, still might make you feel uneasy. You don't know the person, so.
I'd argue that really says a lot more about society than it does about guns. I mean, people really people really assume that everyone else is out to get them and is up to no good. And in some ways, that's, natural self-protection instincts. But, what does that say about society, the media, and culture that we've gotten to a point where everybody by default assumes other people might be a danger to them?
Good point there, Cameron.
I mean, I agree there. I'd say a lot of people have a main character syndrome for sure. Yeah. So I guess circling back to Canada's gun laws, I mean, I'm just going to come out and say it. I think Trudeau is way out of line here. And I mean, I haven't been a fan. Yeah, I haven't been a fan of Trudeau. Yeah, exactly. I was about to mention that. Yeah. I have not been a fan of him at all recently. I'm not going to say my overall thoughts on him right now, but I mean, I think he's bordering on tyrannical at times.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Trudeau. I won't hide it. I just don't like the guy. I don't like his policies. I've done a little bit of research into Canadian politics because I just like to know what's going on with our neighbors up north. But I guess he's probably a better option than Jagmeet Singh, but that's not really saying a lot.
Yep. So I've heard, speaking of, I heard they might be planning more freedom convoys again in the spring. So I'm curious to see if it's going to be another immediate shutdown.
Oh,
if they try to do it again.
We'll see. I mean, we'll see. I mean, we all saw how Trudeau handled it last time. I think part of the reason that he won re-election and the reason he's still in power is because the other options, frankly, just aren't good. The Conservative Party of Canada is basically seen as a joke because they keep putting forth bad candidates and just not campaigning very well. The Green Party, that's a major joke in Canada. In the U.S., the Green Party is kind of like a environmentalist, special interest party. In Canada, it started as that, and then it quickly went down the spiral. So now they're like obsessed with conspiracy theories. They really want to investigate 9/11 and see if the U.S. government did that. What's that one party called? Jagmeet Singh's party. Hold on. The New Democratic Party, the NDP in Canada, is viewed by a lot of people as like more of an extremist leftist party, and that obviously doesn't sit well with a lot of people. So really, I think a lot of Canadians probably think that the Liberal Party of Canada is their only real good option, which, it's not good to really have a bunch of options, but only one halfway decent option,
I suppose that speaks more to a flaw with Canada's current political situation more than anything else.
And ours as well, for sure.
That too.
All right, anybody else? Overall thoughts on, any more to say about gun control, or just Canada? But yeah, I mean, like I was saying earlier, I think it is a good segue into mental health. Talk more about that. I know, Cameron, you've been following what's been up with Kanye West. I've seen a little bit about what he has tweeted. Of course, I know he got suspended fairly recently by Elon Musk because his tweets were very extreme. So Cameron, you want to get started here? Oh, this should be an interesting one.
Yeah. I've actually been following Kanye West's Instagram escapades before this whole thing with Twitter went down, this whole Alex Jones thing. The guy's unhinged. He's lost it. Speaking frankly here, he's a nutcase, and I really hope he gets the help that he needs. Part of me thinks he's kind of being manipulated by other groups and people. That doesn't excuse him at all by any means. Let me make that very clear. He is, at the end of the day, responsible for his actions and his statements and his thoughts. But again, this ties back to the mental health crisis. Kanye is known to be mentally ill, and that makes him prime target to be taken advantage of, especially when he has as much wealth and influence as he does.
So, I mean, his just chaotic tweets the last couple of days before he got suspended. Of course, the main thing that got him suspended was merging the Star of David with a swastika. And then he seemed to have a lot to say about Jewish people. And of course, the Nazis as well. So, Cameron, yeah, you want to touch upon that?
Yeah. That's, yeah, sure. That's another thing that I had noticed on his Instagram posts leading up to this. He kept, like, mysteriously, cryptically referring to quote-unquote business people, obviously referring to people of Jewish descent. I think Kanye's statements were totally out of line. Like, he was saying stuff like he loves Hitler and the Nazis, and I saw where Alex Jones kind of tried to give him an out. You know, he's like, "Oh yeah, you you like their uniforms because you're a designer," and Kanye was just like, "Nope, I love the Nazis. Hitler was awesome." And it's like, when Alex Jones is flabbergasted by what you're saying, what does that say about you? Go ahead, Ashton.
It's really both amazing and honestly really stupid when you see people double down on mistakes, especially in that instance.
What was it? What was that from Fallout and Skyrim? That Cameron, you remember? Yeah. No, that charisma option, -500.
Charisma.
Charisma.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, I think he's kind of doing that on purpose. He's choosing the wrong dialogue options on purpose, just to be outrageous and get attention. You know, the old saying is, any attention is good attention. Even bad attention is good attention. But I don't know. I just can't get behind what he's saying here. You know, it's really crazy stuff. No matter why he's saying it, if it is because he actually believes it, or if he's just trying to get a rise, at a certain point it gets hard to tell. But he shouldn't be saying it at all. I think I will say that one argument to be made is that he's kind of saying this stuff in the sense that, you know, he loves everyone in like a Christ-like sense, if that makes any sense. He's trying to, or at least claiming that he's trying to go down this route of loving everyone. I don't agree with him, but yeah.
Awfully hypocritical.
Yeah, I was like, I mean, we can cut this if we need to, but Cameron, I was reading your friend's essay over what he had to say about it. I mean, I think Kanye, I think he was kind of way off on his interpretation of Kanye. Again, just based on his anti-Semitic things he said and loving Hitler and all that stuff. It's like, you can't say you love everybody in a religious way when you're bashing on a large group of people. I mean, like, for a historical perspective, I mean, I somewhat understood it. Like, I mean, my way of teaching history, I think the best way to teach history is not, like, from a black and white perspective. Like, you have to understand, I mean, there's a lot of gray in history. Like, World War II, Ashton, as you know, for example, like, people love to paint it as this great war of good versus evil. The United Democratic Allies versus the evil fascists.
And yet, the Soviet Union was arguably a fascist state as well, seeing as it glorified Stalin and the Communist Party. Plus, you also had Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong in China.
Right. Of course, even the democratic allied powers, they committed lots of atrocities as well. Think of what was happening in India during the time with the British, the Bengali famine, for example, where 3 million people in India starved to death because of the British scorched earth policies. Of course, they knew what they were doing too. It's not like they didn't know. They knew people were going to starve, but they did it anyways. So the Allies committed lots of atrocities as well. They aren't just these good, loving heroes as we paint them to be. So I mean, I think it's important, like even people like the Nazis or groups like the Nazis, to like understand they did some good things for their country. However, they did lots of evil, outrageous things as well.
Yeah.
So I think you have to recognize both to better understand them. I think, well, like understand why people would. I'm sorry, Ashton.
Yeah, and also I think at the end of the day, it really matters is the bad aspect ultimately going to overshadow the good things you do? Are the bad atrocities you commit going to undo everything you've essentially done for your nation, like the Nazis pretty much did to Germany, and like and what happened with Imperial Japan?
Exactly. So understand the good, bad. I mean, I think you get a better understanding of why people would have allowed these extremes to come into these countries in the first place. So I saw that like from his little essay over it, but I don't think that's what Kanye West really was going for. Like you said, I mean, I think now we could probably start including these parts in. Like you said, I think he is insane. He needs help. And again, it kind of highlights just the mental health crisis we have in this country. Especially, I feel bad for people in the spotlight because you have all these people surrounding you. You're in your own head constantly. I imagine it's probably pretty lonely if you don't have the right support system. And when you have all that power and money, I mean, people become toxic very easily.
Agreed.
What I'm going to get into now is what's happening in Iran. So recently, I think it was yesterday, they actually abolished their morality police. Of course, they've been facing massive protests against various incidents and, of course, classic human rights abuses, specifically against women wearing the hijab. With the abolishment of the morality police, you'd hope, hey, maybe this is a step. Maybe they're folding to the protesters. But it seems today they had installed a new system of cracking down on women not wearing the hijab. So it looks like they'll get a text essentially saying, hey, as a warning, you gotta put it on. You get 2 texts total. And then after that, all your bank account information gets locked out. So you're unable to purchase anything at all. And I assume that has to be cleared by the government. So now, instead of the morality police, this is their new way of cracking down and taking back control. Which is better? I mean, who knows at this point?
I mean, I'd honestly argue, like, there isn't really a better option in this case.
Yeah,
They're both really terrible and not good. I mean, they both have the same end goal of oppressing the citizenry, right?
Correct. And something I've also kind of noticed in situations like this where an authoritarian government, say, I know China has tended to do this quite a lot, where they would either get rid of an unpopular law or seemingly amend it, but then they completely replace it with something that basically takes them right back to square one or even further back. A good example, I think, would be the so-called anti-corruption campaign of Xi Jinping when he came to power. On the surface, it sounds like a noble goal, getting rid of corruption in what is honestly perhaps one of, if not the most corrupt nations in the world. But in reality, it was just a blatant excuse for Xi Jinping to basically purge his political rivals and secure his position. And I think in this regard, when it comes to this new sort of text-based warning system, it's basically the Iranian government slapping a new coat of paint over, I guess, the same sort of laws or standards they expect their citizens to follow, lest unless they punish them for stepping even a millimeter out of line.
Right. And also, they weren't very clear on how they're actually going to recognize those who are violating this law in the first place. Very vague on that. So, how are they going to do that?
Yeah. Right. It's never a good thing, in my opinion, for laws to be vague like that. It just opens the door to all kinds of abuse of power. And if we take a look at Indonesia, they also have recently... Indonesia's parliament has approved a new criminal code, according to BNO News. So they're now saying that sex outside marriage is illegal, unmarried couples are banned from living together, insulting the president is now a criminal offense, and expressing views counter to national ideology has been banned. So this really begs the question, what is the purpose of laws? Are they to prevent us from victimizing one another, or are they to enforce morality? And if that is the case, who decides the morality? Because as we can see, when we look at Iran and China and Indonesia now, it really seems that they're enforcing arbitrary morality that the government has decided merely as a means to oppress the people.
Add Russia in there as well, because today Putin signed a big, essentially anti-LGBTQ plus law, essentially banning any public display of, gay couples.
Indeed, but I think I will say this at the very least. I feel that the laws that are in place reflect the governments that create and enforce them.
Yeah, exactly. Whoever's in charge has to say. All right. Anybody else want? Yeah, Kim.
I will say that, my view on the whole thing is there's a very simplified version of my view on the whole thing. It's that, to put it simply, if there is no victim, then there is no crime. And society as a whole is not a victim, right? To be a victim, you need to have autonomy. So, yes, certain things most normal, well-adjusted people will agree are moral. I don't think that's the reason that they're being enforced necessarily. Like things like murder and theft. Yes, it is immoral to do those things, but the reason that those laws are enforced is primarily because we don't want people to hurt each other and to steal from each other. It's preventing people from being victimized. So when we look at things like drunk driving laws, right? I totally agree with those. You should not drive intoxicated, ever. But when we look at other motor vehicle laws, like speed limits, at a certain point, maybe driving too fast does get dangerous to those around you. But that is more... I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say.
Awfully bold there.
Yeah, people who are going to speed anyway, and ultimately, whether or not they crash into somebody really comes down to their own skill level at driving and how much control they have over their own vehicle. So, should we have speed limits? Maybe in residential zones and commercial zones, sure, but on the highway, I would say no. And when we reach a point where we fear the police because we're afraid they're going to fine us or jail us for something that we've done that hasn't hurt anyone, that's when it becomes a problem.
And yeah, it's like, as you stated, I think this is a pretty libertarian view here. Like, hey, why should the government regulate morality? Like the stuff we've been mentioning, murder, theft, drunk driving, that's all stuff that negatively impacts society because, either you're taking away something from someone else, you're taking a life. But stuff like gay marriage, for example, showing gay pride, sex before marriage. Like, how does that affect you? It doesn't. Maybe you're offended by it, but it doesn't affect you.
Right. Right. And I would say at that point, it is more or less up to you to choose not to associate with people who do those things. And if you want to speak out against things you don't agree with, go for it. Just know that society might not agree with you. And at the end of the day, if somebody's not hurting you, there's really no reason to speak out against it. But, the freedom to associate or not with people who align with your moral beliefs falls on you. Don't go to the government trying to get them to force your beliefs onto others.
Completely agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, so long as whatever they're doing doesn't directly concern or affect me or anybody else in a negative way, I'm pretty content to let people do whatever they want. But I think one thing that this in this day and age that's kind of sorely lacking is that old idea of just simply live and let live.
Yeah, exactly.
I completely agree with that. That is sorely missing from our society. And we've kind of reached a point where society has adopted this you're either with me or against me mentality, right? If you don't necessarily agree with something, like you're not out there supporting it, it could be gay marriage or trans rights or gun rights or whatever. If you don't openly support it, some people have decided that you must be against it and you must hate them and you must want them dead, which couldn't be further from the truth. You should not have to support every little thing in order to prove that you're not an enemy of it.
Yeah, I suppose people's desire for simplicity in life is starting to come back to bite all of us now.
Completely agree there, Ashton. And yeah, I think the best society, considering we're supposed to be a free republic, you share views. At the end of the day, you might disagree with each other, but maybe you're able to find some understanding in the middle ground. I mean, honestly, it's probably a whole different tangent altogether, but still, find some similarity in the middle ground and kind of understand each other a little bit better. Of course, now we're all in our own echo chambers. I mean, social media plays a big factor in the news. We only really want to see what we want to see, what kind of corresponds with our beliefs, and we refuse to listen to the other side of the issue. And anytime someone does speak out against our own beliefs, we're like, they're evil people, blah, 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 shut them all down. There's no understanding anymore. No more common ground, and we're seeing that at the highest level in our parties, all the way to just basic local level as well.
Yeah, it's kind of really a shame how society's kind of devolving in this way.
Mm-hmm. Which again, I think it's something we could probably really explore with a lot of time. Yep. I think we probably should wrap it up here.
Hey everyone, Fishwa again. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Current Case podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow us on Instagram at Current Case, one word, for more content, weekly posts, show updates, and more. Also, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Current Case podcast. If you'd like to support our channel, be sure to check out the Patreon link in the description below. Joining Patreon will not only help support our channel, but give you exclusive content, behind the scenes, bloopers, early access, and more. Thanks again. See you for the next episode.